What if passion wasn't life's gentle gift, but an inevitable wound? From its very roots, the word passion means suffering. Nietzsche knew this. He understood that everything which captivates the soul, everything that tears us from indifference, also hurls us into the abyss of pain. Passion is intensity, and all intensity demands its price. We live in an era where we seek comfort, stability, security. But Nietzsche would ask us, what value has a life without risks, without vertigo, without wounds opened by desire? Passion, whether for a person, an idea, or a dream, never comes without pain. To love is to expose oneself to the risk of loss. To create is to expose oneself to failure. To live intensely is to accept bleeding. The real question is, would you be willing to suffer for what you truly love, even knowing it could destroy you? Nietzsche didn't write to console, but to awaken. Few realize it, but the very word passion already carries within itself an inevitable destiny: to suffer. It comes from the Latin passio, which literally means to endure, to bear, to be pierced by pain. When we say someone lives a passion, deep down we're saying that person is willing to be wounded, that they've accepted carrying an invisible cross. It's no coincidence that in Christian tradition we speak of the Passion of Christ, the moment of most intense suffering. The root of the word doesn't lie. Where there is passion, there is pain. Nietzsche looked at this with different eyes than moralists. While many saw suffering as a problem to be eliminated, he perceived there a profound truth of existence. For him, to live intensely is to accept the collision between pleasure and pain, love and loss, ecstasy and fall. The human being who flees from suffering actually flees from life in its most real form. Passion isn't an exception that escapes us occasionally, but the rule of existence for those who dare to live beyond the surface. Imagine someone who truly loves. This isn't about lukewarm, comfortable affection, but a flame that consumes, that steals sleep, that makes the body tremble. This person knows, even without admitting it in words, that they risk losing, being rejected, being shattered, and still they plunge in. This willingness to traverse pain is the essence of passion. It's not an accidental detail. It's passion's very heart. If there's no risk, no vulnerability, no threat of wound, what remains isn't passion, but merely attachment or convenience. Nietzsche would provoke, how many of us seek passion, but simultaneously want a guarantee we won't suffer? We want the flame without the burn, the abyss without the vertigo, love without the possibility of loss. But this doesn't exist. Life isn't so generous. To receive passion's intensity, one must sign in silence a pact with pain. And perhaps it's exactly for this reason that passion fascinates so much. What would become of us if we lived only in balance, in security, in small, lukewarm joys? Nietzsche would call this herd life, an anesthetized existence without courage to face extremes. Passion, with its promise of ecstasy and suffering, breaks this sameness. It tears us from tedium and puts us in contact with what is most human, the possibility of losing oneself, of surrendering, of transforming. When we think of passion, we immediately think of love, but it can manifest in any field, in art, in politics, in the desire for knowledge, in creating a work, in pursuing an ideal. The scientist who dedicates years to research that might fail knows passion's pain. The artist who spends sleepless nights trying to give form to the unspeakable knows how much this flame burns. Even those who decide to live a simple life, but with true dedication to what they believe, experience this double movement: pleasure and pain, creation and sacrifice. Nietzsche would teach us that we shouldn't try to separate these dimensions. It's an illusion to believe we can have only passion's luminous side without also carrying its shadowy weight. Life's greatness lies precisely in this union. The suffering born from passion isn't punishment, but proof that it has value. If it doesn't hurt, if it doesn't risk us, perhaps it isn't passion, but merely pastime. Therefore, understanding that passion means suffering isn't a sentence of defeat, but a call to lucidity. When we say, "I'm passionate," we should also be saying, "I'm willing to suffer." Not because suffering is desired in itself, but because it's inseparable from the intensity of living. Nietzsche, contrary to those who preached renunciation or resignation, called us to embrace this destiny. Life is tragic, and it's in this tragic character that its beauty lies. Passion hurts, but it also makes the spirit burn, makes flesh vibrate, makes human beings remember they're alive. It's this fire that transforms simple existence into an experience worthy of being repeated infinitely, as he imagined in the thought of eternal return. In the end, the question that remains is, do you prefer a life without pain, but also without intensity? Or are you willing to traverse passion, knowing it always carries within itself the mark of suffering? Nietzsche never hid his contempt for comfortable life. For him, comfort was the most dangerous trap for the human spirit. Not because it was wrong to rest, but because transforming life into a refuge against all pain and all risk meant abdicating one's own greatness. Passion, with its intensity and inevitable suffering, was the opposite of this security ideal. Where there is passion, there is turbulence. Where there is too much life, there is pain. He saw in society a growing tendency toward what he called herd morality, the search for stability, predictability, and obedience to rules that keep everyone in a tranquil and mediocre line. For Nietzsche, this herd dreams of a life without risks, without falls, without profound pains. But such a life is, simultaneously, a life without height, without passion, without transformation. What is gained in comfort is lost in intensity. Imagine someone who decides never to fall in love, to avoid the risk of suffering. This person can live in peace, can avoid disillusions, can even pride themselves on having no scars. But the price of this is a lukewarm existence, without the deep marks of experience. Nietzsche would say this type of life might be bearable, but it's not worthy of admiration. Passion, even when it destroys, gives life a weight and brilliance that no comfort can offer. Nietzsche spoke of the necessity to dance at the edge of the abyss. This metaphor is powerful. To live intensely isn't to build a house in the middle of a safe field, but to allow oneself to walk close to danger, close to vertigo. The abyss isn't there to destroy us, but to remind us that intensity only exists when there is risk. Comfort eliminates risk, and with it eliminates true life. He provoked, what if all suffering wasn't a sign of error but proof of vitality? Think of a body that never feels pain. Initially, this seems a blessing, but soon one realizes it's a condemnation. This body doesn't feel the cut, doesn't feel fever, doesn't feel limits, and therefore dies faster. Pain is a warning that we're alive. Passion's pain is the same thing. A signal that something matters, that there's something burning inside us. Nietzsche saw in this capacity to suffer for what one loves the difference between the common man and the man walking toward the overman. The common seeks relief, avoids tensions, flees from intense passions. The overman, on the contrary, plunges into passions and transforms suffering into creative energy. He doesn't ask for life to be easier, he asks to be stronger. This is why Nietzsche valued Greek tragedy so much. The Greeks didn't hide suffering under veils of religious consolation, nor did they invent a future paradise to compensate for present pain. They looked pain in the face and transformed it into art, into theater, into celebration of existence itself. Suffering was part of life's spectacle. It's this spirit that Nietzsche wanted to rescue, a living that doesn't flee from suffering, but embraces it as part of passion for life. Deep down, everyone who chooses to live intensely already knows this. The artist who risks their soul in a work that might fail, the lover who surrenders to a relationship that might shatter them, the dreamer who bets everything on a project that might never work out. They all know the path of comfort would be safer, but also emptier. Nietzsche would say that greatness is only born from these risks, these falls, these sufferings that the herd so fears. Thus, passion, with its inevitable link to suffering, is also proof that we're truly alive. It's no coincidence that life's most remembered moments aren't calm, routine days, but days when we risked everything, when we suffered, when we burned with intensity. Comfort produces vague memories. Passion produces scars that become history. Nietzsche didn't want us to choose to suffer for suffering's sake. He wanted us to choose to live, knowing that suffering is part of this path. Passion, by tearing us from comfort, returns us to life in its most authentic form. Suffering in this context isn't an accident, but the mark that we dared more than what was permitted. And the question he would leave us is clear. Do you prefer security without life or passion that burns, wounds, and transforms? Nietzsche never treated love as a sweet and tranquil experience. For him, love wasn't a harmonious encounter between two souls, but a field of forces in dispute. Where many see union and peace, he saw struggle, power, and domination. This is why romantic passion is always linked to suffering. Because loving isn't just surrendering, it's also entering combat. He denounced the romantic illusions created by culture. The idea that loving is simply completing oneself in the other, finding the lost half, reaching eternal peace, all of this was nothing but disguise. True love, that which really drags us, doesn't complete us, but shatters us. It awakens in us both tenderness and fury, both the need to merge and the impulse to control. Nietzsche would say, to love is to desire to possess, but also to be ready to lose oneself. If we think carefully, this vision is easily proven in everyday experience. Anyone who has loved deeply knows that love brings not only joy, but also jealousy, fear, insecurity, obsession. There is no passion without wounds. We love, and along with love comes torment. We love and discover in the same movement our vulnerability. We love and realize that the other is also a stranger, someone we never possess completely. This open wound is love's mark. Nietzsche saw in this a way to unmask our illusions. Suffering isn't a defect of love, but its condition. We want from love an impossible security. We want the other to belong to us, never to abandon us, to be forever the source of joy. But the other is free, and exactly because they're free, they can wound us. To love is therefore to accept living on unstable ground, where everything can change at any instant. This instability transforms love into battle. Not necessarily a bloody battle, but a clash of forces. Each romantic encounter is also a power game. Who loves more? Who depends more? Who can leave first? Often without realizing, we try to balance this game. We retreat when we feel we've surrendered too much. We advance when we fear losing control. This painful dynamic is the very essence of romantic passion. Nietzsche would say that trying to eliminate suffering from love is trying to eliminate love itself, because love places us before what we have most human, the need to launch ourselves into the risk of the other without guarantees. To love is always to risk humiliation, rejection, loss. And simultaneously, it's in this wound that we feel life's intensity. The philosopher also saw in love a mirror of existence's broader forces. Life for him is never balance but conflict. Forces clash, dispute, create, destroy. Love doesn't escape this. It's merely an intimate version of the great game of will to power that traverses all reality. We don't love neutrally. We always love with desire, with will to possess, with ambition to be recognized. This isn't a moral defect. It's simply how life pulses. Therefore, Nietzsche didn't advise fleeing from love, but facing it without illusions. To love is to suffer, and this suffering doesn't need to be denied. It's the sign that we're alive, that we've exposed ourselves, that we had courage to open our hearts. What kills isn't love's suffering, but life without love, life that never dares to risk itself. If we think of the most marking moments of our lives, how many of them were born from love? An unexpected encounter, a devastating loss, a gesture of surrender, a jealousy that consumed us, a farewell that tore us inside. Love wounds us because it matters to us. It breaks us because it touches us in what is most essential. Nietzsche didn't want us to romanticize this wound, but to accept it as part of passion's price. Love isn't a promise of peace. It's a summons to fight. And only those willing to fight can truly say they loved. The great question then isn't whether love hurts, because it always hurts. The question is, are we willing to bear the pain that comes with it, in the name of the intensity that only love can offer? Nietzsche had a profound conviction. Nothing grand is born without pain. Passion, with all its weight of suffering, is the spark that ignites the creative process. If love already carries the abyss within itself, artistic and philosophical creation is no different. To create is to bleed in silence, to transform wound into form, chaos into beauty. He himself was witness to this truth in his life. Disease, solitude, rejection, intellectual isolation, all of this accompanied him. But instead of succumbing to these pains, Nietzsche transformed them into books that forever changed philosophy. His suffering wasn't an obstacle, but the raw material of his work. And this is the lesson. What wounds us can become creative force. Look at art's history. How many great artists weren't marked by passion and pain? Van Gogh, with his intense canvases, painted amid his madness and despair. Beethoven, composing symphonies even when he could no longer hear, as if music sprouted directly from his flesh's suffering. Dostoevsky, writing profound novels after years of prison, exploring the tormented soul's depths. All of them, each in their own way, transformed their scars into eternal works. Nietzsche saw in this not a coincidence, but a law of life. Suffering is proof that something traverses us in a true way. Without pain, creation would be merely technique, repetition, copy. Passion, on the other hand, gives intensity, gives urgency, gives depth. The passionate artist creates because they can't contain what pulses inside them, and this explosion is always accompanied by wound. But this doesn't apply only to arts. Each person, in their daily life, also creates from their pain. A mother who, after losing everything, reinvents life for love of her children. A young person who transforms rejection into fuel to build something greater. A worker who, facing loss, decides to change their destiny. It's not just artists who make creation from pain. All of us, to a greater or lesser extent, carry this possibility. Nietzsche would provoke, what do you do with your suffering? Do you complain about it, try to hide it, or transform it into strength? Passion is painful, yes, but it's also fertile. The wound can be grave, or it can be seed. The choice depends on how we face pain. He drew much inspiration from Greek tragedy to explain this. In tragic theatre, one didn't flee from pain, didn't hide suffering. On the contrary, suffering was placed at the center of the scene, to be contemplated, to be experienced collectively. It was as if the Greeks said, pain exists, but we can transform it into art, into catharsis, into celebration. This tragic spirit is what Nietzsche wanted to rescue, not to deny pain, but to dance with it. And here is the most provocative point. For Nietzsche, whoever flees from passion and pain also flees from creation. A life without suffering might seem tranquil, but it will always be sterile. Nothing profound is born in the terrain of indifference. This is why the greatest works, The greatest ideas, the greatest human gestures, always come from those who let themselves be traversed by a passion so strong it almost destroyed them. We can imagine, for example, someone who lives an intense romantic passion and suffers from it. This suffering can paralyze, but it can also become poetry, painting, song. How many songs we still sing were born from broken hearts? How many eternal poems were written in the silence of unbearable pain? Art witnesses that suffering isn't only weight, but also fire. Nietzsche believed that passion forces us to leave the surface. Whoever loves suffers, whoever creates suffers, whoever seeks to live intensely suffers. But precisely by suffering, they find a strength they wouldn't have otherwise. Pain forces us to dig deeper, to seek meaning, to invent something that saves us from despair. This is how passion, while destroying, also constructs. Perhaps this is why Nietzsche didn't preach an easy life. He distrusted any philosophy that promised eternal peace or constant happiness. For him, true life is made of contrasts, light and shadow, joy and pain, passion and suffering. To create is to accept this contrast and transform it into something greater. Deep down, the question is simple and brutal. Do you accept pain as part of the price of living intensely? Are you willing to transform your scars into creation instead of hiding behind comfort? Passion demands this from us. It wounds but also fertilizes. It tears but also generates. And perhaps it's precisely this paradox that makes passion irreplaceable. Because without pain, there's no creation. And without creation, there's no life worth living. Among all of Nietzsche's ideas, perhaps the most radical is eternal return. Imagine living each instant of your life not just once, but infinitely, repeating each pain, each joy, each passion. The question he launches is brutal. Would you say yes to this repetition? Or would you curse existence for being so hard, so full of suffering? It's here that passion becomes essential, because for Nietzsche, only those who live passionate about life are capable of bearing the weight of the tragic. The tragic isn't just inevitable pain, but consciousness that pain is part of existence's structure. Life doesn't promise happy endings. It offers no guarantees. It's made of birth and death, of encounters and farewells, of ascensions and falls. Passion is the response that transforms this burden into celebration. To say yes to the tragic means accepting that suffering isn't a passing accident, but an integral part of life. It's understanding that there's no love without loss, no creation without wound, no victory without struggle. The tragic confronts us with totality. Everything we desire always comes accompanied by a price. And instead of fleeing from this, Nietzsche invites us to embrace it. See an everyday example. Think of a person who chooses to be a mother or father. They know that along with birth's joy will also come worry's pain, constant fear of losing, inevitable separation when children grow and leave. Still, they choose. They don't choose despite the pain, but with the pain. Parental love is proof that we can say yes to the tragic, because we understand that life only has meaning when accepted whole, with its blessings and its wounds. Nietzsche also saw this in the artist. To create is to expose oneself to failure, to criticism, to incomprehension. It's to live always on the razor's edge between ecstasy and ruin. But the artist who accepts this destiny says yes to the tragic because they know pain is inseparable from beauty. They don't create to escape suffering, but to dance with it. This yes is therefore a form of passion for life, not just for the good part, but for totality. To love life only when it gives us pleasure is easy. To love life even when it lacerates us is the true challenge. Nietzsche wanted to form spirit strong enough to look at suffering and say, I want again, I want to repeat, I want everything, even what wounded me. This might seem impossible, but think, how many painful experiences have you lived that looking back, you wouldn't want to erase? How many loves that ended in tears, but that, even so, you wouldn't trade for a life without them? How many failures that at the time seemed destruction, but later revealed themselves as seeds of something new? This is the spirit of eternal return, recognizing that even suffering has a value that can't be eliminated without also erasing life's intensity. Nietzsche believed that only those passionate about entire existence could bear this thought. The weak man curses life because he only wants pleasure from it. The strong man loves it completely because he knows it's the contrast between pain and joy that makes it bearable and even beautiful. Passion for life is the courage to say, yes, I want again, I want everything once more, without removing anything. And here is the key. To say yes to the tragic isn't to resign oneself, but to affirm. It's not to bear passively, but to embrace actively. It's to look at the wound and see in it not punishment, but a trace of the grandeur of living. It's to choose to live passionately, even knowing that each passion brings with it the possibility of suffering. Nietzsche wanted to awaken this spirit in us. He didn't speak only to intellectuals or philosophers, but to every human being who has felt life hurt, and even so, didn't give up on it. Each time we choose to love again, create again, risk again, even after the fall, we're practicing this yes to the tragic. Deep down, his provocation is clear. Would you accept living your life exactly as it is, infinitely, without changing anything, including your pains? If the answer is yes, then you found true passion for existence. Nietzsche repeated a phrase that echoes today. Become who you are. But what does this mean? It's not an invitation to simply follow our immediate impulses, nor to seek a fixed and hidden essence inside us. For Nietzsche, becoming who one is requires traversing pain, passion, and suffering. It's a work of shaping, and raw stone only transforms into sculpture when it bears the chisel's blow. Passion, with its power to seize and wound us, is this invisible chisel. It breaks us, exposes us, forces us to face limits we didn't know existed. And precisely in this process it reveals us. How many times do we only discover our strength when we're tested by a passion that almost destroyed us? How many times has the pain of loving, losing, creating, failing opened in us a dimension that was previously dormant? Nietzsche believed the common man seeks to avoid this experience. He prefers to remain on the surface, protected, without risking too much. But whoever dares to live intensely, even knowing they'll suffer, is who truly approaches their own destiny. It's not about an easy life, but an authentic one. Take the example of someone who becomes passionate about a cause, an idea, a creation. This passion consumes them, steals their sleep, places them before immense difficulties. They suffer, are criticized, face solitude and doubt. But in the end, they discover in themselves a depth they would never know without this surrender. They become more than they were, not because they achieved external victory, but because they traversed passion's trial and emerged transformed. Nietzsche saw in this movement true self-overcoming. Becoming who one is isn't simply accepting oneself, but challenging oneself. It's daring to be more than inertia would allow. And this only happens when passion drags us beyond our comfort zones. The suffering it brings isn't punishment, but the sign that we're on the path of transformation. He often used fire's metaphor. Fire destroys, but also purifies. Whoever has never thrown themselves into passion's fire lives intact, but also unfinished. Whoever dares to plunge into this fire suffers burns, but discovers a more authentic form of existing. Passion, thus, isn't just pain, it's a process of self-creation. Nietzsche also distrusted philosophies that promised redemption without suffering. For him, this was illusion, anesthesia. There's no growth without pain. There's no strength without trial. Passion tests us in a way that no life manual could replace. It tears us from ourselves and launches us into unknown territory where we need to reconstruct who we are. It's at this point that passion becomes a school of self-knowledge. When we love, we discover our deepest fears. When we create, we face our most hidden insecurities. When we risk, we reveal our courage or our cowardice. It's as if passion were a mirror, but a cruel mirror that doesn't reflect only what we want to see, but everything we try to hide. Nietzsche didn't want us to flee from this mirror. On the contrary, he wanted us to look at ourselves in it, without masks, and accept the challenge of becoming stronger, because in the end, passion isn't just an episode of life, but the motor that pushes us to be more. It's through it that we discover not only what we desire, but who we can become. Of course, this path isn't without risks. Passion can destroy us. It can lead us to despair, to madness, to giving up. But even in this risk, Nietzsche saw value. Because living without passion for him was worse than dying from it. It's better to burn and shatter than never to have felt the flame's intensity. The danger is real, but it's the price of a life that doesn't settle for being lukewarm. In the end, becoming who you are isn't a promise of arrival, but a path without end. Each passion, each pain, each surrender transforms us into something new. With each fall, we rise differently. With each wound, we carry a mark that reminds us of what we were capable of facing. With each passion lived, even if lost, we come closer to who we really are. Nietzsche asks us, do you prefer the security of never truly knowing yourself, or the risk of shattering to discover your true form? Passion is this risk. Suffering is the proof. And the result, if we have courage, is the realization of a unique, singular, unrepeatable destiny. We reach the end of this journey through passion and its inevitable bond with suffering. Nietzsche taught us that pain isn't an accident of life, but its pulsing heart. Passion means suffering because living intensely is always risking oneself, always opening oneself to loss, to fall, to transformation. Comfort can protect us from wounds, but it also robs us of greatness. We learned that love is a battlefield, that creation is born from pain's fire, that saying yes to the tragic is true courage, and that we become who we are only by traversing passion's flames. Each wound is also a trace of authenticity. Each suffering born in the name of something that dragged us is proof that we were truly alive. Now the question that remains is, what was the passion that most wounded you, but also most transformed you? Which city are you watching from? Comment down below and let us know how this journey resonated in your life. If this message touched your spirit, like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more reflections that dare to look at life's deepest truths.